I'm going to be talking about a wonderful experience we've had at the University of Maryland. I had my undergraduate students in the undergrad security class conduct a lab on top of Ethereum. Okay, so I've introduced myself in the morning. I'll skip this. I'm a fan of cryptocurrency and especially of Ethereum. I really like this idea of providing this full programmability on top of cryptocurrency, and I believe that will basically enable very rich smart contract applications. And one of the greatest things about these smart contracts is that they will reduce the legal and transactional fees associated with these contracts. Right? Today, for instance, I sign a contract with the cloud service provider, and they will offer me certain service level agreement. And if they fail to offer the service level agreement and to get my money back, maybe I have to go to a court of law. But with something like Ethereum, like these smart contracts can be automated, have automated enforcement. And this can lower the bar of entry for smaller players. And I really believe this will create new markets and new ecosystems. So all of this is very exciting. And therefore, we have the undergrads learn about Ethereum. OK, so what is this lab? Students worked in groups of 4. And each group is assigned one of my PhD students who kind of served the role of a graduate student advisor. And the project proceeded in 2 different phases. In the first phase, every group created an application of their choice on top of Ethereum. Okay, and in phase 2, it's called an amendment critique phase. Okay, so in this phase, and there are 2 forms of feedback. One from the instructor, myself, and Andrew Miller, and also the graduate student TAs. Okay, so we give the students feedback on, whether we think their design is solid, what kind of security flaws we see, and also the students formed pairs between groups, and they critique each other's designs. Okay, and along similar veins, is this other team's project, is it well-founded? What about the security? Are there any security flaws in the design? If you are a venture capitalist, would you fund something like this? So these are the ways that students critique each other. Okay, so the results of the lab is very interesting. There's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that this lab, I think this kind of lab in undergrad security class is probably the first of its kind. And even for myself, it was a tremendous learning experience. Like, I haven't really programmed Ethereum myself. Vitalik actually came to Maryland at some point and gave a very nice presentation about Ethereum and how to program in Ethereum. And at that time, I became basically very fascinated. So a lot of the setup is, in some sense, a little bit, because this is the first time we did the lab, right? So the students, so on the good news side, the students, some students told me afterwards that they really enjoyed learning about cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is awesome, and so on and so forth. And another very good thing is that all the students did a really impressive job. Okay, and I will talk about some of the applications they developed. Well, the bad news is like I said, this is kind of the first time this is done. So actually, I didn't know what to anticipate either. And some students complained that the experience was not very friendly because Serpent is kind of like a in development language, and it misses some features like function calls and this and that, and then they struggled with that quite a bit. Okay, so they complained, but despite the fact that everyone did an impressive job. So I think it was more of an expectation issue, like the students didn't know what they were expected to do. Like I actually didn't require them to have the program fully up and running. Basically, if they have a good idea, but they are not actually able to fully execute it on top of Serpent, I also give them a high credit. But in the beginning, there was a bit like mismatch of expectations. So, and that's mostly where the complaints came from. Okay, so here are the variety of applications that the students created. A bunch of groups created games where people play for money, things like rock, paper, scissors, Russian roulette, and many other games. Okay, so a couple groups created escrow services, like simple escrow services between, let's say, two or more players. And there are also various forms of auctions, like blind auctions and silent auctions. One group created this parking meter application, and then there are a couple groups created stock market applications. So very interesting. And also, very interestingly, there are some lessons that we learned about programming a smart contract language like Serpent. Okay, it turns out that in the first phase, many students actually created insecure designs. I mean, they had really nice ideas, but they were not able to actually execute it to an extent where the design was secure or incentive compatible. Okay, I guess part of the conclusion is that security is difficult, and programming smart contracts is no exception. So I'm going to show some of the typical mistakes that students made when creating these smart contract applications. One class of typical errors come from the difficulty of encoding state machine. So as we all know, this Serpent language essentially allows you to encode this state machine, which will be kind of stored on this blockchain, right? And when the blockchain advances, you apply the transactions are operations on the state, and then the state advances. It turns out that for many of these applications, encoding the state machine is actually tricky. We often observe that there are corner conditions where the state machine is encoded wrongly and some bad things can happen. So for instance, this is a buggy lottery example. And what is wrong with this program is that once the lottery has sold a maximum number of tickets, and if the user keeps sending money to the contract, then the contract will essentially eat the money and not return the money back to the user. So the money goes into a sink. Okay, and this is just probably one of the simplest examples of a state machine error, but students actually created more complex applications like auctions and things like that, and those are much more complicated to encode. And then in the amendment phase, what I suggested to the students is ask them to basically draw the state machine on the whiteboard first, before they actually start doing the coding. So that's one type of mistakes. The second type of mistakes is sometimes they fail to use crypto correctly. For instance, an example is when they were writing these games, let's say rock, paper, scissors, right? What happens when you encode this is people will send their inputs. Let's say I play rock. I send my inputs to the contract, and then maybe Kieran plays scissors, and he sends the input to the contract. Okay, so if the input is not private, there can be like a race condition, like he can wait until I send my input, and then he can send his input. So that's one kind of common mistake where, in this case, you actually should use a commitment scheme. I commit my input, he commits his input, and then we open our inputs. So we decide who wins. Okay. So I used this opportunity to actually teach them how to use things like commitments. And I mean, even though in the end, everyone understood how to use, for instance, a cryptographic commitment scheme, and there's still some difficulty actually in creating that in the Serpent language. But that's not a fundamental flaw of Serpent. It's just basically currently the language is a little bit in development nature. Okay, and there's also other tricky things, like even if we use the commitment, there are also so let's say I open my commitment and Kieran looks at my opening and I played rock, and he knows he plays scissors, right? So at that point maybe he can be incentivized to fail to open his commitment. So this comes to the third type of mistakes. You actually have to design the contract so that it is incentive compatible. So Kieran, upon seeing that I played rock, he is still forced to open his commitment. Otherwise, maybe he will lose his deposit or something. So many groups, they had these kind of flaws in making their contract incentive compatible. And this we also iterated over in the second phase, and then they perfected their designs. Okay. Okay, so this actually poses many interesting research directions. In particular, I'm very excited about creating a better programming language for creating these smart contracts. So what do we actually want from this programming language? I think there are two things that are very important. One is ease of use for the programmer, and the second one is formal security. Okay, so let me elaborate on these 2 points. So for the ease of use, currently, for instance, the Serpent language requires users to explicitly encode the state machine. If you think about it, that actually may not be necessary. Like you can, what we would like to be able to do is to use this kind of ideal world functionality style programming. So this idea kind of came from the crypto world. Like in crypto world, when people specify tasks and security properties, they specify it in an ideal world. And in this ideal world, you can make use of a trusted third party. So maybe the parties would all send their inputs to the trusted third party. The trusted third party performs some computation and maybe send the outcome to these 2 parties. And typically, you have a real world protocol. And then in crypto, like the kind of security guarantee, to show that your protocol satisfies the security guarantee, you show a proof that the real world protocol securely emulates the ideal world. So in this way, essentially, the programmer can focus on creating the functionality and specifying the security properties in the ideal world, which is a much easier task than actually having to write the protocol. Because if you actually have to write the protocol, I have to worry about when I do the commitment, when I send the message to Kieran. So all of these nasty details I have to worry about. But I think maybe one holy grail is, to allow users to kind of program without actually having to worry about how to instantiate the cryptography. All they have to do is to specify the security, to specify what computation tasks they want and the security properties that they want. And then everything else can be automated, including the automated generation of the cryptographic protocols. And then when we do that, we can enforce formal security. So essentially, we have actually been doing quite a bit of work in this style of research. We have applied this idea to things like secure multi-party computation and verifiable computation. Okay. And our languages basically capture this kind of idea, ideal world style programming. We have automatic compilation of these programs into cryptographic protocols. And the security is automatically formally guaranteed during the compilation process. Okay. So it would be really exciting to kind of try to apply the same type of ideas to cryptocurrency, maybe to create a smart contract program. So that's what we would like to be able to do in the future. And this would require a bit of interaction between programming language and crypto, obviously. And we are also very excited about potential opportunities to collaborate with the cryptocurrency community. Okay. So this basically is the last. Let me just conclude really quickly. So one thing we can learn from many years of security failures in the past, before when we design systems, we didn't have security considerations in mind. And what happened was later the systems get broken, the programs have bugs, and you have to kind of fix them in a way that retrofits existing systems, right? So this creates basically a huge headache, enormous headache for the security community. But for crypto, so what can we learn from this for cryptocurrency? Cryptocurrency is kind of an emerging area. We are still kind of designing what the future of cryptocurrency should look like. And for cryptocurrency, it will carry a lot of high-value transactions, and as a result, security is super important. Okay, so here basically we have both an opportunity. So we have basically, now is the opportunity for us to do things right. We should have these formal security guarantees when we design the system, instead of design something, it gets broken, and worry about it later. That's probably not going to work for cryptocurrency. So we should do it right from the very start, or at least try to do it right. Okay, so just a couple announcements. One is we are trying to do an experimental launch of an altcoin called Permacoin. And by experimental launch, what I mean is we would like to attract users to basically use Permacoin, but we don't want to commit to like an official launch at this point yet. But we are thinking about some kind of arrangement where we pay back people for the coins they mine, let's say in a year's time frame. And then we are interested in looking at this from like a more scientific perspective to see what happens during the launch. We still would like to seek more inputs on how we should do this. And the second announcement is we have a cryptocurrency hotshot speaker series at the University of Maryland. So please come and speak. And we are also looking for a little bit of sponsorship, mostly just to cover speakers' travel. Okay, all right, yeah, thanks.